Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take source materials you've sent our way and really dig into the key takeaways.
Yeah, the idea is to help you get a handle on what's most important without you needing to sift through everything yourself.
And today, well, we're diving into something quite chilling out of Chicago.
That's right. We have this source, an article detailing over 50 unsolved strangulation deaths of women. It spans nearly 2 decades.
It's a really heavy topic, and the main question the article tackles is pretty stark.
Is it a single serial killer behind these deaths?
Or are they, separate tragedies, unrelated homicides happening under maybe similar awful circumstances?
Exactly. And this article we're looking at, it really lays out the arguments for both sides of that Chicago Strangler theory.
So our mission here is to walk through the evidence presented in the source, try to understand the different angles.
And maybe grasp the broader picture around these terrible deaths.
Think of this as us helping you navigate the complexities laid out in this source material. Okay, let's get into it.
Right.
So the article starts by, setting the scene with the basic facts. And they're haunting.
Yeah. Over 50 women found dead in Chicago. Time frame is roughly 2001 to 2018.
And the cause of death is consistent? Strangulation or asphyxiation?
And where they were found. That's important, too. The article points to places like abandoned buildings, alleyways.
Vacant lots.
Yeah, often isolated spots. But also, significantly, places where a body would likely eventually be discovered, not completely hidden forever.
And the victim profile shows a really striking pattern.
It does. Primarily African-American women, ages ranging quite a bit, from late teens to late 50s.
And the article notes something about their backgrounds, suggesting vulnerabilities.
Right. It mentions histories, often, of things like substance abuse, maybe sex work, run-ins with the law.
Factors that the source suggests could make someone more vulnerable, maybe an easier target.
That seems to be the implication. Whether for one specific predator or perhaps multiple people preying on vulnerability in those areas.
The condition the bodies were found in also had similarities mentioned in the article.
Yes, nearly all were partially or fully unclothed. Many showed signs suggesting sexual assault.
But here's a key challenge highlighted in the source.
The forensics.
Exactly. A lack of sort of clear forensic evidence definitively tying all these cases together.
And that lack of forensic linkage becomes really the central point of tension in this whole debate the article explores.
Okay, so let's really dig into the arguments for the theory of a single serial killer, the Chicago Strangler idea. The article presents some pretty compelling points.
It does. First off, that victim profile we just talked about.
The consistency.
The consistency, yeah.
Yeah.
Their vulnerability, their backgrounds, nearly all being African-American women. The article suggests this could point towards, well, either a racist motive or perhaps a specific sexual fixation in a single killer.
And then there's the method, the modus operandi.
Right. The repetition of the killing method, strangulation, asphyxiation. That's very consistent.
And the locations. Finding bodies in places like alleyways, vacant lots. The article argues that's maybe a bit unusual for, let's say, typical murders.
Yeah, the source suggests it could be part of a signature, finding them relatively easily. It also notes that strangulation itself is often seen by, forensic psychologists as having a strong sexual component.
Which is common with sexually motivated serial killers.
Exactly.
Now, the geography seems really key here, too, the clustering.
Oh, absolutely. The article names specific police districts, South Side, West Side.
Washington Park, Garfield Park are mentioned.
Right. These murders aren't spread randomly across the city. They're concentrated. And the argument presented is that this really suggests the killer knows these areas well. Maybe lives there, works there.
Familiar ground.
Familiar ground. And this point connects to the work of the Murder Accountability Project, MAP. The article brings them in.
Ah, yes, MAP. They use algorithms to look for patterns, right? Potential serial killer activity.
That's it. They analyzed, I think the article says, over 50 of these Chicago cases, looking at location, victim type, method.
And their conclusion, according to the source.
They found, and this is a direct quote mentioned, one heck of a cluster.
Wow, one heck of a cluster.
Which, for MAP, is a very strong signal pointing towards a possible serial killer.
Okay, one more piece for this side of the argument. The timeline, there was a gap.
Yeah, a noticeable break. The article points out a pause in these types of killings between roughly 2014 and 2017. Then they seem to start up again.
And the serial killer theory proponents, what do they make of that?
Well, The argument presented is that maybe the killer was locked up during that time.
Or moved away temporarily.
Or moved away, exactly. Something that interrupted their activity.
So you can see how the article builds that case. It feels quite persuasive when laid out like that.
It is. But then there's the other side. Significant skepticism, especially as the article details, from the Chicago Police Department.
Right. Let's get into those counter-arguments. What's the main pushback?
Forensics again. The lack of hard evidence connecting the dots.
So the DNA.
Exactly. The article says the police claim they've got about 21 different DNA samples from roughly half the crime scenes.
21.
21 different profiles. And the police perspective, as reported, is that this directly contradicts the idea of one perpetrator.
Especially given the sexual assault element noted in many cases. You'd expect the same DNA if it was one person.
That's their argument. And it's why, according to the source, the police have consistently resisted the serial killer narrative.
And the article mentions actions they've taken.
Yeah, it says they've closed over 20 of these cases, arrested 13 different men in connection with some of them.
Although only one conviction is mentioned as being directly for the murder itself in the source material.
Correct. That detail is in there. So many closed, but maybe not fully solved in the way you might think.
So if it's not one killer, what's the alternative explanation put forward, according to the article?
The police, and the article mentions some criminologists and analysts agree, point towards broader socioeconomic factors.
Like what?
High crime rates in these specific neighborhoods.
Right.
Poverty, drug use. Issues that, sadly, often correlate with lower homicide clearance rates generally.
So the argument is the clustering isn't necessarily one killer, but a symptom of deeper problems in these areas leading to many unsolved cases involving vulnerable people.
That's the essence of it. The environment itself creates conditions where these tragedies occur and often go unsolved.
And the article acknowledges that the victim's circumstances, the vulnerability, maybe involvement in sex work, statistically put them at higher risk anyway.
Yes, the source includes that point. They were in a high-risk group, regardless of whether a specific serial predator was operating.
Okay, what about that timeline gap, 2014 to 2017? How does the against side explain that, according to the source?
Where the article mentions the possibility of other factors, maybe changes in policing tactics during that time.
Or community dynamics shifting.
Something like that, external factors. Though the article does kind of frame this as maybe a less compelling counterpoint compared to the DNA evidence within the context of the overall patterns.
So exploring this article really shows you there are strong points on both sides. It's not clear-cut.
Not at all. But the article, importantly, pivots near the end. It moves beyond just the who or how many.
Right, it shifts focus to what is maybe the most undeniable point.
Absolutely. Regardless of who did it, one person or many, the terrible truth is that over 50 women, vulnerable women in Chicago, were brutally murdered.
And the resolution rate is, well, starkly low. The article highlights that only one of these deaths is officially marked as solved.
And many others just listed as closed. The source suggests this implies solving these murders hasn't been the highest priority for the authorities.
Which leads into a really critical discussion the article raises about attention. Societal attention, or the lack of it.
Yeah, there's a quote in there from a journalism professor, John Fountain, that really hits hard.
The one comparing the reaction to these 51 women's deaths?
To the potential outcry if 51 dogs had been killed in the city.
Yeah, that comparison really does stick with you.
It's powerful. And the article argues that the victims' profiles mostly women of color, from tough neighborhoods, maybe with difficult pasts.
Seems connected to this apparent societal neglect, marginalized in life, and the article suggests marginalized in death, too.
It's a really sobering point. And the article's final takeaway is pretty direct.
Which is?
If it's not a serial killer, well then Chicago still has the unsolved murders of 50 vulnerable women on its hands. The focus on maybe a serial killer shouldn't obscure the fact of dozens and dozens of unsolved homicides concentrated in these communities.
So this deep dive, looking closely at this article you shared, it really maps out the evidence for and against this deeply unsettling Chicago Strangler theory.
Yeah, it takes you through the patterns, the victimology, the geographical clustering.
But also the significant forensic questions, the police perspective, the socioeconomic arguments.
And maybe most importantly, it forces us to confront the human cost. Over 50 lives lost. Families, communities, still without answers for nearly all of them.
The different viewpoints in the article, they don't just present a crime mystery, they also raise some uncomfortable questions.
About how society values lives, definitely,
Sure.
especially when victims come from marginalized groups.
So after digging into this source with us, what stands out to you? What does this lack of resolution, this relative quiet surrounding so many deaths, suggest about societal values?
And consider this too.
Hmm?
If it's not one killer, what does that say about the systemic issues, the dangers faced by women in these specific Chicago communities, day in and day out? It definitely leaves you with a lot to think about.